So the title of my talk this morning really truly is The Spiritual Sun is Always Shining. And it is always shining. It's shining forever and always because it is eternal. It is eternal and never dying. It is the one presence, the one power, the one consciousness from which all things come and to which all things return, and within which all things live and move and have their being while we are expressing as those individualized manifestations of the divine. This spiritual sun is ours. You know how our sun is? You know, the sun in the sky that well, you can't see it today because it's kind of clouded over. But if we went down to the airport and we got on a plane, and that plane would fly up through those clouds, and what happens? Everybody's done that. You get on the top of the clouds, the sun is shining. There's nothing, no possibility of anything anywhere, anyhow, getting between the sun and us. And I think that sometimes, even though our spiritual sun is like that, sometimes we allow conditions, events, circumstances, situations to cloud our vision of that spiritual sun. But it's always there. And that sun is, that light is just a reflection of the love that is spirit, the love that is God. And make no mistake about it, God, the divine creative intelligence, whatever we wish to call it, is pure and unadulterated love. And I know lots of us have been like disenfranchised or discouraged or maybe even beat up by like this picture of an old God, you know, sometimes from the Old Testament that's vengeful and judgmental and like angry. But that picture of that God is not the true God. That's a picture that was painted for us by men who were fearful and anxious and intimidated by the physical world around them and insecure in their place in it. And they painted this picture, so they made a God in their image and likeness. And of course, throughout the ages, it's been kind of presented to us and used under the heading of religion to kind of control the masses. But that was never been the real God, because the real God is love and light and happiness and joy and beauty. Is it not? And it's that God, it's exactly the opposite. We are made in the image and likeness of that. So if we're not enjoying the vision of that spiritual sun all the time, it's possible that we've let something cloud our vision of it. But it doesn't change the essence of that original love and light that is there. Ernest Holmes, the founder of Science of Mind, told us years ago that there is a power for good in the universe greater than you are, and you can use it. And of course, this power is for good. It has to be. It couldn't be any other way. If it wasn't for good, it would have self-destructed eons ago. So we know that it's a power for good. Anybody mention this? I'm walking around with a book in my hand. Because I'm going to talk in a few minutes about Ralph Waldo Emerson, a person that we refer to as the father of New Thought. Although I'm not ready to talk about him yet, I just want to have a quote from him. This is a book by Eric Butterworth, a Unity minister. And he said, shocking as it may seem, the God of our fathers is no longer adequate. So if once we had that vision of a God, it's no longer adequate. Life in the space age calls for a larger thought of God. Ralph Waldo Emerson realized this many years ago when he startled audiences with the suggestion that when we break with our God of tradition and cease from the God of our intellect, God will fire the heart with his presence. And isn't that so true? When we put everything else aside and we go within and we recognize our divinity, when we recognize and realize that we are spiritual beings having a human experience here, that we are never disconnected from our divinity, unless, of course, we allow that to happen. And we could allow it to happen. But the fact is that that one power, that one presence, that one consciousness is at the base of everything. And we need to focus our attention on that. In times when we're feeling like we can't quite see the sun, we just have to focus our attention on our intention to be that divine being that we were made to be. This isn't always easy, is it? Simple, but it's not always easy. I mean, sometimes in the heat of battle, it's tough to remember that we have a set of actions that we should be following as part of our daily spiritual practices that allow us to be ever open and appreciative and accepting of that divine love and wisdom that is ours by divine birthright. And it's unearned. We don't have to do anything to get this. It's ours just by virtue of being. So, back to Ralph Waldo Emerson. He really astonished the world when he said, we have a personal relationship with God. So it's not us here and God over here. We have a personal relationship. And we can fan that relationship. We can build it. We can make it ours. We can make it be what rules our life. We do not have to let circumstances, situations, events, occurrences bring us down and fall back into that old idea of, kind of religion. Sometimes I think we have a tendency, I know I do, to want to tie ourselves to the stake, say, of an old idea, especially spiritually. And what I mean by that is elephant trainers. Anybody have an elephant trainer in the family? But elephant trainers, they get a baby elephant and they drive this huge stake in the ground. Huge stake, and it's got a chain that comes off it and a big round cuff that they put around the elephant's ankle. And the baby elephant pulls and pulls and pulls and tries to get free of this, and it can't. It just can't. It's not big enough yet. It's not strong and powerful enough yet. And it's kept there for years. And as it gets older and as it gets bigger, it truly becomes powerful enough to pull that stake up out of the ground many times over. But it doesn't, because it's tied to the idea that it can't. It's been conditioned that it cannot. So even when it gets old and large and hugely strong, it still restricts itself to that little area that chain allows it to run in. We don't need to do that. We don't need to be tied to that stake. We just need to realize, to recognize, and have faith in the fact that we are limitless creatures, that all of God is available to us all the time. And what does it? Well, it's the faith. And what's the faith? Well, everybody knows what faith is, right? We can have faith. I got faith in this, faith in that. And faith gives you that warm, fuzzy feeling, doesn't it? And really, if that warm, fuzzy feeling is enough for you, there you go. Thank you very much. We're done here. But I'd suggest that that's not enough, because that warm, fuzzy feeling could be turned into seriously strong, meaningful existence in a life that counts. And where you wake up in love every morning with the world, with everybody, because you know everybody you meet is your divine equal. You're never going to meet somebody who's not exactly the same percentage, which is 100, by the way, the same percentage of God that you are. But we have to have that faith placed in our devotion to that knowingness. Did you follow that? So we have faith in our devotion. It's because it's the devotion to the oneness, to the power and the presence of the divine. It's our devotion to that in combination with the faith makes our world meaningful. Our thoughts, our feelings, our beliefs are very powerful. They outpicture as our world. That's how powerful they are. The things that we think, the things that we feel, the things that we believe become the things that show up in our world. So we have to pay attention to them, and we have to pay attention to our intention. Right? We all have the best intentions. I know that. But sometimes our attention kind of falls off them. And without the devotion to that faith, we can easily go astray. So I don't know if you're familiar with, there's a sacred Hindu text from a very long time ago, of course, the Bhagavad Gita. And in it, that divinity manifests itself as a person, as Lord Krishna, okay, because it's trying to get a point across. And Arjuna, whom he's speaking to, is a little bit afraid of what's going on and indecisive. At any rate, so the divine takes the form of a being, Lord Krishna, and he says, by supreme devotion, my own realize me and my nature, what and who I am. After knowing these truths, they quickly make entry into me. So not into him is showing up personified, into that divinity, once we recognize it's there. And Ernest Holmes, our founder again, said, an evolved soul is always a worshiper of God. So how do we put that into play? His faith, to me, in my mind, it kind of reminds me of like a ball. A baseball, a football, a basketball, a soccer ball. That ball is of really severely limited value if it's sitting on a shelf. It's only of real value when it's put into the game and the action starts. Does that make any sense at all? In the Bible, there's a phrase that says, faith without works is dead. We've probably all heard that somewhere along the line, and we use it a lot here in Science of Mind. And that's true. So what's this works? Well, works just means action. Faith without action, faith without activity, faith without doing something in the direction of that faith and that devotion and that divinity is very, very limited in what it's going to do for us. And Jesus, the master teacher, showed us 2,000 plus years ago that what we're talking about here is the Christ consciousness. Now, there were many people who had this consciousness to a lesser degree than he did before him. And there have been many people since that have had this same consciousness, because we all have the consciousness. It's just a little less developed in most of us. And yet, he proved it to be the case. Yet as powerful as his proof was, Jesus never healed anybody who didn't want healing. And he never healed anybody who didn't have the faith and the possibility of that healing. That's how powerful our faith is. About a century before, Ralph Waldo Emerson, whom we call the father of New Thought, was a guy that we refer to sometimes as the grandfather of New Thought. Don't you just know? I don't know where this is going to end. I think grandfather is as far as we go. That was Emanuel Swedenborg. He was a Swedish scientist, philosopher, theologian, mystic. And he was a very devout Christian. And he, too, kind of shocked the world at that time, because although he was a very devout Christian, he disavowed the idea of the divine Trinity. And that was kind of big news in the day. He said, no, there can't be a divine Trinity. There can't even be a divine tuity. Okay? There can only be one. There can only be one power and presence behind everything. And of course, he was kind of echoing, if you will, or stating more strongly the opinions, the feelings, the findings of sages and philosophers and mystics since time started taking recording of things that we said. You know, all the way back to the ancient Greeks, and they told us the same thing. Sure, you can have semi-gods and demigods and demiurges and combinations, man and God. Have all that you want. Just know and understand that behind all of that, there's still only one power. And that is the power of this consciousness, which includes all things. Only one power and one presence. And it was from Emanuel Swedenborg that our talk title today comes, because he said that the spiritual sun is always shining. It's a reflection of the light of that one God, that one divine presence, that one consciousness. And it always appears to man, ladies, don't get upset, that's just the way they talk. It appears to man to always be at a 45-degree angle in the eastern sky. Now, here's the good part, because he's got this grandiose philosophy that explains all of this in minute detail. But I don't really understand a lot of it, and I'm not going to bring it to you. I'm only going to just tell you that my take on this is that the sun is always up there in the eastern sky, because the spiritual sun for us is always, always, always on the rise. And it's always available. And it's at 45 degrees so that nothing between us and it can block it from us. We can always enjoy the light from that spiritual sun, unless we construct something to cause that to be different. And I think it stays at that angle to let us know that there's so much more of it in front of us. There's so much more that we can experience of the light, of the love of God. And too, it stays there to let us know that it will never wane. And it will never wane. It'll never flicker. It'll never diminish. It'll never darken. It'll never go out. It cannot. Not possible. So as long as we're basking in that sunlight, what do we have to remember to keep this in play? Well, we have to remember that with our faith and with our immersion into our divinity, we have to remember to keep our works, our activities, our actions congruent with those intentions. Remember, we set the intentions. And it's important. I have a little story to illustrate just how important it is. Don't you know? So there's a gentleman driving down this busy boulevard, and he looks up in his rearview mirror, and behind him, here's this gal in an SUV, and she's like right on his bumper. You know, I mean, they're traveling about 45 miles an hour. And he looks back, and the light in front of him turns yellow. And he's thinking, oh, man, if I really hit it, I could get through that light before it turns red. He said, but no, the safe thing to do would be just to stop. So stop he does. Well, don't you know that the gal behind him is just like going crazy. She's obviously in a hurry, and she needed to get through that intersection. And she's honking the horn and pounding on the steering wheel, and she's cussing up a blue streak at him. She's flipping him off. She's jumping up and down in her seat. And all at once she hears this tapping on her side window. Well, it's a police officer, because they're always around when you want them, right? And he has her get out of the car, and he has her put her hands up on her head, and he takes him down. He handcuffs her behind her back, and he walks her back to his patrol car, and he sits her in the back seat. And then he goes up in front of his car. Now, I know none of you guys have ever been stopped by a traffic cop, okay? So you don't know what he's going to do next, but I'm going to tell you, because I have been stopped. He's going to get on that little speaker thing they have, and he's going to call that license plate number into their central area, and it's going to tell him a story about that. So he does that. And it's about 10 or 12 minutes has gone by, and he walks back, and he opens up the back door of his patrol car, and he helps this lady get out, and he takes the handcuffs off her, and he says, sorry for the misunderstanding, ma'am. He says, I was right behind you when I saw you jumping up and down and cussing that guy in front of you, and honking the horn and flipping him off. He says, and I noticed too that you had the "What Would Jesus Do" bumper sticker, and you had the little chrome-plated fish, and you had the license plate frame that said "Follow me to Sunday school," and of course you had the "Coexist" bumper sticker. He says, and so naturally I assumed you must have stolen this car. Let's don't go there, okay? Let's have our actions, our works be congruent with our intention, and that intention to live in the fullest of the divinity that we can. Oh, I got time for one more little story. Who's ever seen a magician? A magician? I love those guys. They're magic, But they take a person, they put them in this stand-up box, and they close the doors, and then they sometimes they leave it upright, sometimes they do this with it. But they always take these sheets of metal and they push them through, one at the neck and one at the waist and one at the knees. And I'll be damned if they don't swing those things apart. And you get to see the pieces of the people. Here's the head in one box, and here's the stomach in one box. And he talks to the head, and he tickles the feet, and he shakes the hand. I don't know how they do that, but it's great. It's great because at the end, puts all the pieces back together, pulls the sheets out, the metal sheets out, and he opens the door, and the person walks out whole and complete. With one great big abracadabra. He just abracadabra, and he opens the door, and out they walk. Well, our abracadabra is this. Our abracadabra is knowing that we stand strong and tall and pure and true in the divine nature that we are. We cannot be separated from it. We cannot leave it behind. We can ignore it. We can misuse it if we wish. But the fact of the matter is, when we're done ignoring and misusing, it's still there. And it's still as strong as it ever was, because it's always the same. Every other manifestation in the world is going to change, because that's the nature of the physical world. The manifest body of God. That's its nature. But this will never change. And our connection to it will never change. So I would just like for you, when you go forth from here, to keep that in mind, and to know that we never, ever, ever have to increase or expand our divine consciousness, because it's already infinite. The only thing we ever need to do is get used to the recognition that that is the case, and know that that spiritual sun is always shining for us. Namaste. Thank you.